Isaac. Sorry, I didn't hear. I don't hear you. I don't know why. We don't.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Now I hear.
But now I switched off my headset.
Yeah, I don't know how to put you in
Now I put my headset in.
a big place. Let me. So yeah.
I hear you wonderful with my headset, but it seems you can't hear me.
Yeah, I hear you now. Yeah, I'm here. Now I don't again. You.
When I take this off,
Yeah. No, it's
then you can
okay.
hear me. When
It's
I
okay.
take this
Now
off.
now I hear you.
Yeah, but I take off my
Okay.
headset. But yesterday it worked.
Yeah. It's perhaps something with I don't know. I cannot remove myself, but
Wait a second. I will get out.
okay, try again. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. No, it cuts. It cuts. It's perhaps the pin. Try to. No. Yes. No.
And now you can hear me.
Yes. Clearly.
Yeah. Then I think I have to get rid of my headset.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Neither.
Oops.
No. It's okay.
Wait a second. Perhaps I have still 1 minute. No.
Yeah.
Oops.
I don't know how to put you in big place.
Yeah, it will be then significant for later.
James is joining us.
Ah.
Yeah. Hello.
Good morning, James.
Welcome.
Good morning to Berlin.
Hi.
I'm Albino. I will be off screen in a few minutes. Okay. When the other guests arrive.
Sounds good to meet you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, very good. Sound and clear. I will join Paulo now. Hello, Paulo.
Just a minute. I'm just going to put the sound.
Yeah, it's okay.
Just a minute.
some echo.
Yes, sound is there. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
So we are just waiting for Antonio.
Yeah.
I think I think your light is very good, perhaps better than mine. All of you. What about my light? I don't have much light. Do I?
No, you don't.
Let me put better or a lot of reflexes or not really.
A little better.
A little better.
Yeah.
Ooh. Doesn't go much more.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Very good. Okay, so we are just waiting for Antonio. Well, I think that we know the basics. Mute, stop cam. Yeah, Albino will be in the background during the discussion. I think that, whenever you think it's a good idea, you can put the full screen on the speaker, and the others can get out.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a bit up to you. I'm not.
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah, I think it's better. And then you come back, and if you want just to, I don't know. That's perhaps not a problem, but anyway, we can always put off the the camera for this.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's good.
so
We will see you.
Okay.
Okay, so my plan is to just to introduce you very briefly. I will not get into details, and perhaps as your interventions go, I might end with some some questions, some suggestions for deepening what you were saying, things like that. Are you okay with that?
Sounds good.
Good. So the show will be yours. I mean, my intention is to start with Antonio, but of course, if he's not going to be there on time, we might have to change a bit our plans. But
he's coming. He's coming.
Okay, good.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Not too bad.
Very good. Thank you very much for all of you for this participation. I think it is the first proper webinar that really puts this issue after Kabul. 2 words are very meaningful. A lot of why Kabul and so on. I would have a lot to say about that. Actually, if there will be some time, I would love to share with you my memories of the July the 15th in Tashkent, where I understood that it was going to happen very soon. When I saw everyone pressing Ghani, more or less diplomatically, to disappear. Everyone, I mean, from Khalid to Lavrov to all the Chinese, the Pakistani, and of course the hosts, the Tashkent, the Uzbeks, and so on and so on. So that's when I I didn't understand. But that's perhaps for a later conversation. We are really going to focus on after Kabul, not so much on why. That's going to be something different, perhaps in a later stage. And I think you are really, as I could understand from what I read and from what Siegfried told me, you are really the best. We are very, very, very proud of having you here. Very honestly, it's not only for for being diplomatic. It's real. Okay, so we will try to get in exactly in time at 11. Well, 1.5 hours it's the limit. I think that nobody is going to listen to us over this time, more than this time. No, it's actually I would go even for less than that, but okay, it's okay. So try to concentrate your points. Let's see how it will work. The questions, how we can follow them. That's going to be important. Apparently they will appear in the comments. I don't know if you have the same screen as me. We have private chat. Private chat is between us, only the 5 of us, Albino that is managing, and the 4 of us will be here. And comments are those who are coming from Facebook or YouTube, people that will want to say something. And we may. It's a bit different from Zoom. It has some qualities, something more difficult. Actually, we just balanced both, and we decided for this one, for StreamYard. Anything you want to ask or say, or?
I have a question just to clarify the speaking order so that we can be ready in advance.
I was thinking about starting with you, because you will be starting. You will address, what is the main question. I mean, Taliban. What is this? What is going to happen? I mean, what is your forecast? How the Taliban are the main? The actors on stage. Well, secondly, it might be either Siegfried or James. James. Well, it's a bit what I don't know what you think. Because James, you are going to have a more broadened view, and you will speak about the administration and so on, and and Siegfried will have the Pakistan angle. Well, actually, the Pakistan is almost as important as the Taliban. That's I think our view. So perhaps Siegfried, before, what do you think?
From our topics, I think either I will not try to replicate. I guess we have some overlaps, Antonio and I, but it would make sense when I continue after Antonio, because I will then, because we have come overlap for sure, I think, and but I could then a little bit more deep, and then open the floor for James. This is an idea, or I could round it up again for the discussions.
And actually, I wanted to say in my speaking notes, I left a comment on the role of the Pakistani services at the end. So that would be a nice transition,
because I will also talk. I will talk about Taliban, Haqqani, TPP. This will be also a very significant part of my.
Yes.
The relationship between Pakistan, Haqqani, TTP, because I think this is. I know this is the core of your work, but I think we have to. This is also part of my presentation.
And actually, the related question is, how long should we each one of us speak?
Well, I think that you should be aiming for 10-15 minutes. Okay. That's. Perhaps we should have said that before, but I think that's what makes sense.
Okay.
What do you think?
It's fine. I thought of something about that, so about the length. So I got, my presentation is targeted, I hope, around that time. So it should be okay.
No, that's very good. That's very good. So, absolutely. Let me, exactly. So 11:01. So I think that we are ready, and so we will keep this order. So let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that is following SADF latest webinar. The title of our webinar is very clear, concise, and to the point. After Kabul, that is, after the fall of Kabul, what is going to happen? And I think we were very fortunate to have three of the most important experts on the actors on the ground. And therefore, I would like to present to you first Antonio Gustosi. He is Senior Research Fellow at RUSI and visiting professor at King's College. Among various other works, he is author of Taliban at War. He is definitely, according to our view, the best available expert on the Taliban in our Western academic world. We will have, secondly, Dr. Siegfried Wolf. He is the key research expert within SADF, and within his expertise, Pakistan is fundamental point, and most in particular, Pakistan policy and intervention in Afghanistan. He is one of the best experts there is in our Western world on this. And last but not least, well, James Page is the honorary fellow at University of Durham in the School of Government and International Affairs. He is also a very, very important expert, and he's going to make a presentation that is going to be more more comprehensive. The title, by the way, is very, very telling and very appealing. Discomfiting times, difficult questions, and disruptive answers. Afghanistan after the 2021 Taliban takeover. It's really fantastic. But we will start by having Dr. Gustosi, Antonio. Is going to focus on the power struggle within the Taliban. He's going to be the first speaker. Please, Antonio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Of course, it's a complex topic. I will start by saying that one, of course, should be looking at the Taliban in perspective. The Taliban have always been a little bit in turmoil throughout their existence. They never tried really to be a centralized organization. At some point in the history, there were attempts to increase centralization, none of which was successful. It only created additional turmoil. So gradually, the Taliban set up for an organizational model which we could describe as essentially quite loose and quite federal in structure, although they wouldn't use this term, but when we try to analyze it, we have to keep in mind the Taliban are never been trying to be like, to imitate a Marxist Leninist organization, a Maoist group, or even a Muslim Brother organization. Although there were attempts at some point to bring in some Muslim Brother models of organization, which especially at one point dominated one of the Taliban top level shuras, the Shura Peshawar. But in the main Shura Quetta, these ideas never really gained currency, and attempts to introduce them were defeated. So the Taliban are structurally loose, and in a sense, we could describe them as a successful, in a way, attempt to manage the diversity of Persian society. So essentially, they operate in a segmented society. They've adapted to that, and then learned how to manage it, make it work. There are limitations to what they can do, but at least, compared to other political organizations that tried to operate among Pashtuns, their model is more resilient, is more adaptive. And although there is always a certain degree of conflict within the Taliban, by and large, they've been able to keep the Taliban together. So we have to keep this in mind. When we see conflict within Taliban, we should not immediately start saying, oh, they're arguing, therefore they're gonna splinter as if they were a Marxist-Leninist group. When you have a centralized organization and there is a disagreement, it often ends up with a split. But the Taliban, we have to keep in mind, they're not organized like that, and they're designed to tolerate, to coexist with the internal conflict. So that's what you have today. The Taliban, like in the past, they are divided into groups. There are leaders and figures who compete with each other for influence. There are regional differences which are quite significant. That doesn't imply that they're on the verge of collapsing or splintering. Doesn't mean that it cannot happen. Like any organization composed of human beings is subject to the risk of imploding and splintering, but we should not mistake internal dynamics with the imminence of a split. Now, much of the media have been focused in the last few weeks on the fact that the Taliban cabinet that was announced on the 7th of September had a significant Haqqani presence. Many have described it as Haqqani dominated. I don't think that's true. There are in the cabinet out of 33 appointees, which include not only minister and deputy minister, but also some heads of sub-ministerial organization like the central bank or the chief of staff of the army, etc. So out of 33, 5 are members of the Haqqani network. So 5 out of 33 is a significant representation. Only one of them is really senior, the Minister of Interior, who is Sirajuddin Haqqani himself. So it's not the dominance. I wouldn't describe them as dominant. The really dominant group, it's pretty clear, is the Southern Taliban. There are 16 of them out of 33 in the first wave of appointments. And quite a few of them are senior, including the Minister of Defense, which is more senior in the Afghan context than the Minister of Interior, of course, the Prime Minister, etc. So and of these 16, 12 are Kandaharis. So clearly the old leadership of the Taliban, the Kandaharis, are still dominant. They dominate, but they form a coalition with the Haqqanis, which was not the original plan. So it's true that the Haqqanis have emerged in a stronger position that it seemed would have been the case at the beginning when they tried to put together a Taliban kind of caretaker government in the early days, which was not supposed to have significant Haqqani representation. The intent was to earn international recognition, and they realized that having the Haqqanis on board, especially Sirajuddin, would not help in that regard. But it didn't work. The Haqqanis fought back. So in that sense, yeah, the Haqqanis were successful in imposing their presence within the government. Doesn't mean that they dominated. Now, interesting, I think, and something to be kept in mind is that of the 5 Haqqanis who are members of the cabinet, of which one is a deputy minister, the others are ministers, 3 are not from the southeast. The Haqqanis are known for controlling the southeast of Afghanistan, so the region known as Loya Paktia, and also the province of Logar. And they're also known to have influence beyond that. In fact, the Haqqanis took Kabul on the 15th of August, and many of the Haqqanis affiliates who took Kabul were from the neighboring province of Wardak, so which is not in the southeast. So they have influence around Kabul for a number of reasons, but also mainly because they were tasked as early as 2006 by the leadership to basically open the Kabul front. So they've been building up their presence in the region for many years. But these 3 that I mentioned are from Nagar and Kunar, which are in the east. And I think it's a deliberate choice of the Haqqanis. There were many more people, more senior members of the Haqqanis in the southeast, in Logar or even Warta, that could have been appointed. But I think the strategy of the Haqqanis for the future to increase their weight within the Taliban is to increasingly position themselves as a representative of the interest of all the Eastern Pashtuns, which means basically anybody who is not from the South, really. There are different tribal confederations in the East. You have the tribes of the Southeast and the tribes of the East belong to different confederations traditionally, but I don't think that's so much important, because what unites them is a kind of protest against the attempts of the Kandahari Taliban to fully dominate government, as they in the past fully dominated the Taliban. The leadership of the Taliban traditionally is overwhelmingly from the South. There are a few people from the East. Sirajuddin was a deputy, so he was one of them. A few of his people were appointed to the commissions in the so-called Quetta Shura. But if you were going to weigh the presence of all kind of Eastern Pashtuns in the Quetta Shura, you would find that they were dramatically underrepresented, basically. And that was a concern. There were grievances there. And now, of course, with the Taliban in power, these grievances become even more significant, because, one thing is having somebody to lead or to participate in leading an insurgent organization. They're supposed to be divided there, to be distributed, not so attractive. But in government, the potential for, supposed to be distributed is much greater. So everybody wants to be there. Everybody wants to be in at the center of the state. So the Afghans are positioning themselves increasingly to represent not only their own interests as a group, but also they are trying to position themselves, and they made this clear in their discussion and even very animated discussion, so to speak, over the cabinet. That's important. Still, we have to consider that there are in total in the cabinet, in the first wave of appointment, there were a total of 10 Eastern Taliban, so including the people from the Southeast, appointed, mostly in junior positions. And of these, only 3 are linked to the council. There are 7 who are not. So they say it's work in progress, basically. I think the Quetta Shura is also by appointing these 7 other Eastern Pashtuns, which are not particularly well-known or powerful people. In fact, they are unknown quantities. They don't seem to have a significant following. I think they're trying to signal to the wider Taliban that you don't need to be with the Afghans to get some kind of representation. I think there is essentially competition, has been there for quite some time, even before the fall of Kabul, between the Southern Taliban, who are trying to strengthen their links to Eastern Afghanistan, and the Afghans who are trying to do the same. So the two compete for the loyalty of the Eastern Pashtuns, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of Pashtuns or Taliban in the East, and whether they will side with the Southerns or with the Afghans might decide in the future who will lead Afghanistan. Because, when they will do the next election for a leader, they vote, essentially. So the different Taliban representative will vote, and having the Eastern Pashtun on your side can be decisive. It can be a decisive asset. Now, there are a lot of other regional differences. The Northern Taliban have raised issues, especially the Tajiks and the Uzbeks among them. They did get some rewards. They do have some people appointed. The second wave of appointments, as a few more of those getting positions, although typically quite junior positions in government. But they still want more. They still feel that they're not sufficiently represented, and this kind of dynamics, are always gonna be there. Because everybody wants the top ministries where more spoils are concentrated. Right now, there is not much money to go around. So that also contributes to strengthen this competition for the few positions where there is some money that is there, because of course the Taliban are concentrating the money they do have, that they raise themselves on the key ministries. So of course they need to pay for the army, their fighters. That's a priority. So if you're at the Ministry of Defense, of course, are in a much stronger position if you have the Ministry of Agriculture. At least for now, that's quite clear. And this to conclude, one other thing that the media, or at least some of them, have been stressing is that this coalition between the Khan and the Kandaharis was a result of the intervention of the Pakistani security services, the ISI, whose head was in Kabul in the days before the announcement. And it's clear that he played a role, that he mediated between different Taliban factions. I don't think you can say that the ISI asserted its dominance. There's an overstatement, I think. The Pakistanis, a bit like everybody else, is trying to control what's going on and trying to influence. I don't think it's particularly successful. It might be marginally more successful than others, but they're also struggling very much with dealing with the Taliban. And I think the best example of that, and I will hand over to Siegfried over this, is the TTP, which the Pakistani Taliban are carrying out raids inside Pakistan, especially with Dagestan, but also other areas, in part from the east, where the Arkani, as I mentioned, have their connection and their presence, but increasingly, and now mostly from the southeast. So they're based actually in the turf of the Arkanis. So to say the Arkanis are a stooge of the ISI at the same time when they actually host the TTP, which is carrying out armed raids, increasingly so, inside of Dagestan, requires some qualification. And I think it's just possible to argue that that's the case. But I will stop here and hand over to Sigrid. Thank you.
Gustosi, I think that your lesson was absolutely marvelous. I mean, I actually sensed a bit of what you mean when I saw what I call the empowerment of the Taliban leadership in Tianjin by the Chinese Foreign Affairs Minister, where there were nine Taliban commanders around him. So it is very telling on the nature of the Taliban, but you were the one who really put this in perspective, showing that this westernized tendency to look at the Taliban or other jihadi groups as some sort of centralized Marxist-Leninist is completely makes no sense whatsoever. Although, regarding Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood comparisons, I would like to, when you have the opportunity to see that with you, but we will not focus on that. We will continue on this issue. You really, your description of this Arkani-Kandahari dynamics is fabulous. It touches exactly on the core of what Dr. Wolf is dealing with in Pakistan. So I would immediately pass the floor to him. Please, Dr. Wolf.
Yes, thank you, Paul. The takeover of Kabul by the Pakistan-sponsored Taliban, the question arises which role Islamabad will continue to play in Afghanistan. But I think this depends on following factors. Foremost, on the course of Pakistan's ties with the new Taliban government and the impacts a Taliban-governed Afghanistan will have on Pakistan. To a lesser degree, it will depend on the involvement of Pakistan's relation with other neighboring countries, states, especially Iran, the extent and nature of China's Afghan engagement, and how the international community, foremost the United States, will adapt to the new situation in Afghanistan. Considering the manifold support offered to the Taliban during the last 2 decades, Pakistan has reason to anticipate a more or less friendly regime in Kabul. As such, it does not come by surprise that Pakistan was one of the first countries to welcome the Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan and celebrating it as a strategic victory. However, there are also reasons to believe that the relations with the Taliban government will be not as easy as hoped in Islamabad. The Taliban has already ignored Pakistan's advice to establish a really inclusive and broad-based government, as we already heard from Antonio. Furthermore, Pakistan is concerned about the Tehrik-i-Taliban, the Pakistan Taliban, or just in brief, TTP, and is not pleased that the Afghan Taliban refuses to support Islamabad's efforts in fighting the TTP so far. Also, it seemed that the Taliban have set up a commission to deal with Pakistan's cross-border terrorism fears. It remains questionable whether this will come to a satisfactory result for Islamabad. In this context, it is important to recognize that there are not only obvious shifts in the relation between the TTP and the Afghan Taliban, but especially between the TTP and the Haqqani network, a major component of the Afghan Taliban, as very well explained, outlined by Antonio. The Haqqanis, known for being traditionally very close to Pakistan's security establishment, seem to have recalibrated their relations with Islamabad in favor of the TTP. The fact that Pakistan temporarily stripped off the supplies and the financial assistance to the Haqqani network due to their resistance to the US Taliban deal in 2020 was not well taken by the militants. According to Antonio's research, the TTP moved away most of the fighters from eastern Pakistan and is now hosted by the Haqqani network in the southeast of the country. That the TTP gave up its neutrality in Afghanistan to fight alongside the Taliban against the Afghan government forces, and that the Haqqanis are obviously ignoring the anti-Pakistan agenda of the TTP, paved the way for the collaboration. That the Haqqanis are relatively well presented in the new government gives them additional leverage vis-à-vis Islamabad. As such, one should not expect that the Afghan Taliban will take in the near future conclusive action against the TTP. Instead, the Taliban government states that the TTP is a Pakistani and not an Afghan problem, and rejects demands to crush the TTP sanctuaries on its soil. Another severe issue of content is the matter of recognizing officially the Durand Line as international border, which serves until now only as a de facto demarcation between both countries. Here, it will be unlikely that the Taliban leadership, like all other governments, accept the colonial drawn border. The expressed critique by the Taliban on Islamabad's fencing of its Afghan border is an indication that the Durand Line issue will continue to cast its shadows over Taliban-Pakistan relations. However, despite its extreme unlikelihood, the greatest setback for Pakistan-Taliban ties would be when the Islamist group decides to put aside its ideological differences with India as it has with China in order to establish political ties and open opportunities for trade and investment. But here we have a lot of different contradictory statements by the Taliban, and we have to see what is going on in this direction. Having this in mind, one needs to shed some light on the potential impacts of the Afghan imbroglio on Pakistan. According to West-based senior expert Marvin G. Weinbaum, whatever gains in influence Pakistan may have achieved with the Taliban in power, it has inherited a neighbor with a collapsing economy and financial system on the verge of a humanitarian crisis. According to Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, the prospect of a civil war, which was his country's biggest worry, seems to have been averted, at least for the moment. Nevertheless, for Khan, the outbreak seems still be simmering as long as the Taliban are unable or unwilling to form an inclusive government. Any further escalation in violence in Afghanistan will have severe economic and social political ramifications for Pakistan. Islamabad will be most likely confronted with a new large influx of Afghan refugees, which not that happened so far, but it will be likely, and this would contribute to the administrative challenge and financial burdens, and as well as rising further COVID health concerns. From a security perspective, the way how Islamists in Pakistan are celebrating the Taliban takeover of Kabul confirms the country's leadership fear that it will energize anti-state militant extremists and bolster Pakistan's ultra-conservative religious groups. So here, the religious hardliner could put Islamabad under even more pressure to make the state more Sharia compliant, on a similar line the Taliban doing in Afghanistan. Moreover, with the Taliban being given an entire state, the TTP has regained ideological strength and confidence, as well as additional resources which the terrorist groups will most likely direct against Pakistan. In fact, according to Hussein Haqqani, a former Pakistan ambassador to the United States, the TTP would like to replicate what happened in Afghanistan in at least the Pashtun areas of Pakistan. Another worrying dimension of this spillover effects is that the TTP and other militant groups will turn against Chinese development projects, especially those linked with the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or just brief CPEC. Against this backdrop, one should expect that Pakistan will continue its full support for the Taliban. We are witnessing that Islamabad intensifies its diplomatic engagement, focusing basically on two issues. Firstly, despite that Pakistan leaders are publicly declaring that any decision on the recognition of the Taliban government would require regional consensus, Islamabad went ahead and conducts lobbying efforts to get the Taliban government recognized. In this context, it is crucial to highlight that Pakistan Foreign Ministry stated that Islamabad will take independent decisions when it comes to recognizing the interim Taliban administration. Obviously, Pakistan will not only underline that it will resist any potential pressure from the United States on its Afghanistan policy, but also encourage other countries to follow its example. Interestingly, Islamabad further stressed that it will not become part of any politics of blocs. Obviously, Khan refers to any Washington-inspired potential anti-Taliban alliance formation. Secondly, Pakistan is pushing for what I would call detaching of human and political rights violation and other atrocities against the Afghan people conducted by the new Taliban regime from the provision of international humanitarian aid supplies. For example, National Security Advisor Yusuf warned for an isolation of the Taliban regime and criticized Washington and other Western powers' action of freezing of Afghanistan's central bank assets until one can see whether the Taliban uphold human rights and steams militancy. Moreover, Yusuf stated that when the international community does not engage with Taliban leaders, the West faces another 9/11. This is getting echoed by Prime Minister Imran Khan, who stressed that it would be prudent to handle matters impacting the human condition in Afghanistan without politicization and attempts to demonize the Taliban. In brief, Pakistan attempts to put moral pressure on the international community to grant non-condition-based aid and humanitarian assistance to the Taliban. Besides the ongoing political diplomatic support for observers, it is obvious that Pakistan continues to provide military assistance to the Taliban until today, and there are no indication that it will stop it. Instead, it appears that the Pakistani army and the Inter-Service Intelligence, or ISI, even stepped up its engagement for the latest Taliban offensive, leading to the surrender of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, the ousting of the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, and the apparent defeat of the remaining anti-Taliban forces in the Panjshir Valley. Here, several experts are stating that the high level of sophistication and coordination of a military campaign, flanked by a distracting diplomatic strategy, keyword Doha process, indicated that the Taliban enjoyed the support of Pakistan. Islamabad rejects any involvement in the Panjshir. Here, it is much debated if the coinciding presence of the ISI Director Hamid in Kabul indicates the key role that Pakistan's security forces played in Afghanistan during the last months, or it was just related to border issue, internal security, and, as Antonio mentioned, potential negotiation between different groups among the Taliban. Last but not least, one must also expect that Pakistani military and intelligence will try to push as many militants, jihadists based in the country into Afghanistan. Moreover, Islamabad will continue to seek, or at least try to seek, assurance from the new rulers in Kabul that Afghanistan soil will not be used to export terrorism across the Durand Line. But one should not evade that Pakistan will attempt to use its influence over the Taliban to discourage militant forces residing in Afghanistan to conduct activities abroad, especially, or for example, in Central Asian states or in India, mainly Kashmir. In sum, one can state that neither Pakistan nor the central political leadership of the Taliban want the relationship to lapse. Both the Taliban regime and Islamabad will remain to be bound together by common interests. The Taliban need Islamabad to achieve international legitimacy and administrative support to run the country. Despite the reduced dependence on military equipment and financial support, the Taliban will continue to rely on logistic, technical, and partly financial support, and the Taliban will for any upcoming armed confrontation. Also, the opportunities to seek shelter and to conduct recruitment in Pakistan remains still essential for the Taliban, especially in times when its relation with the United States and allies might escalate again, and or the instability of the government or coherence of their movement might be at stake. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Siegfried. This was a very, very interesting lesson, and listening to you, I just recall these famous words from Hillary Clinton, sometimes a bit underestimated, to Pakistan. Well, snakes in your backyard won't bite, only neighbors. Well, it seems like she was really not so out of the situation. And the situation, it seems very, very intricate, what the scenery we are seeing, because it seems like obviously the Taliban know that they depend a lot on Pakistan, as you explained, but on the other hand, they want to keep the leverage with the TTP. And so the relation is not straightforward, and what will happen is going to be very, very complex to predict. But anyway, as the final initial intervention of our webinar, we have now James Page, that is coming from Durham in the United Kingdom, or is associated with Durham in the United Kingdom. And I repeat the title of his talk, because I think it is really very, very beautifully telling what we are facing. These conflicting times, difficult questions, and disruptive answers. Afghanistan after the 2021 Taliban takeover. So thank you so much for being with us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. In this presentation, I will address 4 areas, but these relate to, as you noted, discomforting times, difficult questions, and disruptive answers that, in my view, have arisen. Firstly, the rapidity and shock of the Taliban offensive in its latter stages. Secondly, the collapse of much of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. Thirdly, the matter of external support that has been addressed to some extent already. And fourthly, political divisions. So I hope to give a useful overview. And one thing that informs this is how much confusion there's been about these topics. And I think this will help possibly with our thinking and questions about what next, indeed the title of this webinar. So firstly, I think illustrative of the accelerating rapidity of the Taliban offensive that began actually at the start of May 2021 is that following the fall of the first provincial capital, Zaranj, in Nimran province on the 6th of August, 5 provincial capitals fell in only 3 days. And within a week after the fall of Zaranj, the Taliban had captured 21 of Afghanistan's 34 provincial capitals. Although the rapidity of the Taliban advance came as a shock to many, the Taliban had been building up towards substantial military offensive for some time as part of their talk and fight approach, or more accurately, their fight and talk approach. Indicative of this is that when President Joe Biden announced the withdrawal of US forces on the 14th of April 2021, the Taliban proceeded to triple the number of districts it controlled within 2 months. Also, the Taliban had pre-positioned its forces prior to their coup d'etat, continuing their strategy of surrounding numerous provincial capitals, as they had clearly done as of early May. Therefore, the Taliban could have moved so swiftly in the latter days of the military offensive that culminated in the seizure of Kabul should not have come as a surprise, particularly to those with a reasonable overview of developments. I think this raises rather difficult questions regarding the latter, and claims by some that the rapidity of the Taliban offensive was not foreseen, and that, in words of one senior military officer, everybody got it wrong on Afghanistan. Indeed, the possibility and indeed likelihood of a fast-moving Taliban military offensive was pointed out, for example, in July US Intelligence Service report and a UK Foreign Office assessment. And the French government, upon the advice of its analysts, and with much the same intelligence, started to evacuate staff in May. So difficult questions consequently arise regarding why the Taliban agreement of the 29th of February occurred without the full consultation and agreement of the Afghan government. It was supposed to lead to a new post-settlement Afghan Islamic government as determined by intra-Afghan dialogue and negotiations, but it did not. And why were the conditions set out in it neither implemented nor enforced, specifically cutting terrorist links? And the Taliban continued to be a threat to the security of the US and its allies. Also, the Taliban refused to undertake substantial talks with the Afghan government, nor was a reduction in violence pursued by the Taliban, despite it being an understanding between the negotiating parties. Secondly, regarding the collapse of much of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, the losses, ceding of ground, defections, and general performance of Afghan National Security Forces, with some notable exceptions, has received widespread remark from numerous figures. This has ranged from US President Biden to civilians in Afghanistan, not to mention military professionals, pundits, and others. Indeed, Afghan National Security Forces were a cornerstone of the US-led international efforts to support Afghanistan's security and development, particularly latterly, including mutual interests such as counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. With so much effort and expense expended upon this, its defeat has been highly visible. It has also been a highly symbolic blow. Several reviews have been set up, for example, by NATO, US Congress, and others, and perhaps difficult questions will be raised about this. But yet it is also discomforting that some have been so swift to place so much of the blame on Afghan national security forces for what has unfolded. For example, US President Biden. This is particularly so when a consensus has been emerging that highly restricted US air support to Afghan national security forces, Afghan national security force design, aspects of its development, and the US withdrawal of contractors and even munitions supply at a crucial time to a key enabling element of it, the Afghan Air Force, were major factors in its overall performance. The evidently corrosive effect on Afghan national security force morale of the US negotiating a deal with the Taliban without the Afghan government has also importantly been cited as crucial, as well as clear pressure on the Commander-in-Chief, President Ghani, to step down. This can hardly have been reasonably expected to result in propitious results or good results, even when the US goal was controversially to forge a new Afghan government, despite President Ghani having been elected and in possession of an officially recognized mandate. I think this raises several critical questions regarding, firstly, the development of US and allied efforts in Afghanistan post-intervention, particularly regarding support provided, to whom and towards what. Secondly, the coherence of efforts in context, including regarding both support and more direct actions taken towards political goals. And thirdly, the will and commitment of the US and allies towards not only Afghanistan, but also supporting liberty and constitutional democracy internationally, and addressing the increasing threat of militant Islamism and its supporters. Answers to these are likely to disrupt the self-image of some actors in terms of power, commitment, calculation, and even competence, and various claims that have been made pertaining to these. This includes particularly pressing claims regarding counterterrorism coverage in Afghanistan and political influence. This includes in the region post-withdrawal. Moreover, the scope and capability to employ coercive diplomacy to good effect. It may be reasonably argued that the conditions were not appropriate for the initiative that was embarked upon, that is, to negotiate a so-called political settlement in Afghanistan. The US and the Taliban understandings of it were so far apart that not only should it have been revisited, the nature of what was occurring should have been realized, intensifying war that did not lend itself to such an approach as it had little prospect of success, and indeed of diplomatic agreements being honored, including regarding an unofficially recognized entity. While this view may disrupt current official thinking, it is necessary to consider it in view of what has happened. This brings me to the third matter of external support, which has been at the crux of both policy and operational issues in Afghanistan, and the development of strategy. It also brings to a head the overarching issue of what ought to be internationally supported, what ought not to be, and how this is to be addressed, including in the wake of the fall of Kabul and political alignments that have resulted. These issues have been particularly discomforting, with claims that it was mistaken to support the re-establishment and development of the Afghan state and democracy in Afghanistan. Some have even termed it an effort to turn Afghanistan into a Western-style democracy, which was hubris. Yet a fair reading of the historical record shows that a clear demand existed in Afghanistan for constitutional democracy in 2001, with an international and to some extent regional consensus to do so, that I should note also included Iran. Contrary to some claims, there is a domestic history of such democratic efforts in Afghanistan, despite them being highly challenging. Ostensibly, the desire for democracy in Afghanistan continues to exist among their population and important political constituencies today. So to summarize in this regard, I think disruptive of such simplicity of the view that trying to pursue democracy in Afghanistan supported and that it was Western hubris, our efforts were in fact less towards a Western-style democracy than an Islamic republic with democratic elections, including for the head of state, and respect for human rights. I believe this is a very important distinction that can help make sense of what was attempted, the challenges involved, and what could have and could be done better in the future. For example, in other contexts, if not Afghanistan. It also begs the question, what should be done about states and actors who are seeking support to develop democracy that is identifiable as Western values? Should they be denied support because some identify it in that way? Particularly discomforting here and difficult to question is, why is there so much misunderstanding about this matter? I think a lot of people have been weighing in who don't quite have a handle on the subtleties of Afghan history and its complexity. An important and underpinning element is that too often efforts in Afghanistan has been characterized as nation building by the US and its allies. But nation building is what a host state does, not the supporters, because it cannot be done for the host nation. I believe it is apt to support the aspirations and efforts towards democracy and liberty in Afghanistan, and it was after 2001. I don't think that ideological neatness and simple explanations are very helpful here, which has been rather the trend in a lot of commentaries. I think some further points that I'd make is that the withdrawal from Afghanistan so abruptly has resulted in little counterterrorism capability in Afghanistan. This is contrary to some claims that were made by the Biden administration, but quite a few commentators did warn of this. For instance, airstrikes by the US and close allies in Afghanistan for counterterrorism now require overflight permission, indeed from those who work to expel the US and allies from the region. Also, the closest US bases for counterterrorism strikes in Afghanistan are about 2,000 miles. And as we have seen, the latest US drone strike in Afghanistan suffered literally from fatally poor intelligence. So the capability to disrupt terrorists in Afghanistan has itself been seriously disrupted by the hasty withdrawal. I think in addition, the lack of consultation by the US, particularly in recent years, and acknowledgement of the sacrifices allies have made has hardly been amenable to unifying allied efforts, including against current and future threats. And while the Biden administration is increasingly focused on China, wider focus on the importance of regions such as Central Asia and Middle East in addressing threats by it appears to be receding. I think this may be a flawed approach, because the US probably would do well not to take on China alone, and certainly not to the exclusion of important allied interests and what they can offer. I think a pertinent example of this is that China requires resources from Afghanistan and also through regions such as Central Asia and the Middle East to fulfill its aims. And it is in these regions that alliances will be critically important, not only for them, but also those who wish to influence Chinese efforts and maybe even resist them. I think fundamentally, this brings into focus the question of the role of Pakistan, without whom, as Siegfried said, many believe it would not have been possible for the Taliban to have mounted its rapid military offensive or the protection of the Taliban movement. Pakistan's support for the Taliban has certainly not receded, but in recent years, US support for Pakistan has, but Chinese support for Pakistan has increased. And I doubt that Pakistan would have undertaken all that it did in relation to Afghanistan recently had it not been under the wing, to put it quite bluntly, of China. I think this causes quite a lot of disruption regarding views as to the cause of what happened in Afghanistan, and also expectations about what kind of pressure can be brought to bear, both on Afghanistan and Pakistan, and indeed alliances and their dynamics. The fourth and final aspect I want to note are internal divisions. Much has been made of internal divisions within the Taliban and also the Afghan polity. Those kind of divisions directly affect the possibility for a so-called inclusive Afghan government. But I'd also note that there's a considerable amount of division amongst allies and also the international community writ large on how to deal with Afghanistan now. Symbolic of this, or highly indicative, is the Taliban have already moved to have one of their officials recognized as the holder and of Afghanistan's seat at the United Nations. This seems not to have met with a very strong response so far, although some have been lobbying in favor of it. Pakistan, as noted by Siegfried more broadly, but also Qatar has been highly active. But I think there's a more fundamental division that is more alarming, if you like, not just recognition, but also the division that emerged between military and civilian efforts or diplomatic efforts regarding Afghanistan. On the one hand, in the US government, you saw that Special Envoy Khalilzad was pressing to have President Ghani step down and an interim government, an inclusive government, be forged. Not necessarily the Taliban domination, but I think that was fairly inevitable. However, when the Taliban turned up at the gates of Kabul, it was clear that there really wasn't a lot of clarity regarding the US position towards the Taliban offensive. And the CENTCOM commander reportedly did not have a clear line regarding what to do about it. He was unwilling to intervene, and there was no clear instruction that the Taliban should be let in. So the Taliban did enter Kabul, and the regime then, the Afghan government, fell. This kind of tension has been building for some time. The US military in general warned against a rapid withdrawal of US troops, but Special Envoy Khalilzad was in favor. I think there needs to be quite a bit of discussion about the utility of following what's called coercive diplomacy. Afghanistan has shown it hasn't particularly worked. The US objective for a long time was to split the Taliban. Actually, elements of the US government and allies appear to be the ones who've been split. And this does not bode well regarding what's going to follow in Afghanistan. I think particularly regarding the developing terrorist threat, the moral hazard, political hazard of recognizing the Taliban regime. Meanwhile, the plight of the Afghan population is certainly worsening, and it's difficult to see that any level of humanitarian aid will address grave political issues in Afghanistan that are quickly occurring and show no signs of decelerating. So alliances seem to me to be absolutely key, both within administrations and external to it. And this is one of the most important lessons, I think, that needs to be learned. And now that we're entering new territory in Afghanistan, and how the plight of Afghanistan and those in Afghanistan and those affected by what goes on in Afghanistan comes to bear. Thank you.
James Page, thank you so much. You have been really making a wonderful summing up of so many questions that we are confronted with. Your assessment seems to be absolutely brilliant. We have been for the three of you with over 3/4 of an hour. I spent the rest of the time. I honestly think that no one can find in 45 minutes so many important messages like the ones you sent to us. It has been really fascinating. We certainly will put our webinar in our website for consultation. I would like to say to all of us, to all of you that are following us in the social media, that you can come in with comments. We are prepared to answer you. In the meantime, we still have some minutes in front of us. Of course, that the issues raised are for their nature. They would not end. We could go endlessly discussing them. But if I am to to focus on things that perhaps would enlarge our perspectives, I would dare to start with Professor Giustosi on a particular issue, which is, you focused on the Kandahari Haqqani network dynamics brilliantly. I've never seen nothing like that. But there are others. One of the most intriguing things is Iran, because we know that Iran has been involved with the Taliban a lot. They were also betting a bit on this Panjshir Valley resistance. They were apparently very angry for the fact that the Pakistanis helped the Taliban to smash it. How is it? How do you see Iran in this puzzle? The Iran influencing the Taliban, and also, in this forming resistance that did not work out. What is your view?
Well, I think certainly when the cabinet was announced on the 7th, so the first wave of appointment, which is of course by far the most important because all the top positions were distributed at that point, it became very clear two things. First, that the divisions within the Southern Taliban, they've been there for some time. They've been trying to mend them, but essentially, the appointments showed that they were still there. Nobody from Helmand was appointed to that, in that wave of appointments. So basically, Helmand is not a province whatsoever, contributes probably more fighters to the Taliban than any other province, and also military leaders, because traditionally, within the Taliban, the political leaders come from Kandahar, the military leaders from Helmand, or most of the time. In fact, before Mullah Yaqub was technically from, the families from Uruzgan, but we could say is a adoptive Kandahari. Before he was appointed head of the military commission, the head was Ibrahim Sadar, who is from Helmand, and before Sadar, you had Abdul Karim Zaki, who is from Helmand. And clearly, Yaqub was a political appointment; he's not really a military leader. So it was an attempt of the Kandahari already before the final offensive of the Taliban to kind of assert a degree of political control over military leaders who were going a bit rogue already. So the fact that during the first wave of appointment, neither Sadar nor Zakir got any jobs was very significant, and it shows no anybody else from Helmand, no anybody from Western Afghanistan. That shows, as I said, two things, these persistent tribal issues, between the tribes of Helmand and the Kandaharis, which I think is more than a tribal issue, is a political, military relationship issue, one. And two, the fact that none of the friends of the Iranians made it to the first wave of appointment, whether as a minister, as a deputy minister, or anything else. So the only one who had some relations, but a bit controversial with the Iranians, is this chief of staff of the army, Faziuddin, this Tajik from Badakhshan. But the Iranians have the strongest relations with the Western Taliban, the Taliban of Herat, of Farah, etc., and with the Taliban of Helmand. And Sadr, in particular, is the man who basically worked closely with the Revolutionary Guards of Iran, basically incorporating into the Taliban asymmetric tactics or hybrid tactics, if you like, as taught by the Revolutionary Guards. So he's certainly a very important person, and a person that he was made by the Iranians, and he maintains very close relation with them. And he's a believer in, if you like, Iranian or Revolutionary Guard military doctrine. So I think at the point was clear. The message was, first of all, the Iranians were really betting on a coalition government because they want and they still want to get the other allies and clients in Afghanistan. So various Hazara parties and political leaders, the various Tajik parties or groups and factions and leaders incorporated into the government, and they didn't get it. And second, they didn't even get their Taliban allies within the cabinet. So, of course, at that point, it seems pretty clear the relations with Iran were tense. And if you look at the media, what was happening in the media was quite a lot of obvious tension between Taliban and Afghan government media. With the Iranian media accusing the Taliban of being inclusive, and the Taliban openly saying, you are inclusive in Iran, yeah? Soon as get a lot of jobs in government in Iran. So really this sparring on TV, so it was not like something in a backdoor discussion, was on TV, on Iranian TV. So the tension was there. And then, of course, the thing with Panjshir is not actually that the Panjshir is per se a very close relation with the Iranians, but the episode of Panjshir was very important because that meant that the negotiation over coalition government Barada was trying to push through at the point were dead. Because of course at that point getting Jamiat into the government becomes impossible, and I think we should rule out that not only the Panjshiris but Rabbani, who had to deal with the Taliban, and various other leaders of Jamiat, of lesser importance, at this point it's very difficult for them to accept any offer. Second, and it's also a question whether the Taliban want them, because Rabbani at the end took position in favor of the Panjshiris, so it becomes much more difficult for the Iranians to, even under the best circumstances, to have a deal that brings their friends into the government and therefore counterbalances the power of the Taliban. So it's not Panjshir per se that upset the Iranians, but the implications, the political implications. And of course, there is a sense in Iran that these things don't happen by chance. And they suspect that the Pakistanis, who have some understanding with the Iranians, with the Russians about bringing together a coalition government, have been cheating them. That the Pakistanis have not been really working very hard to achieve that. Perhaps even the contrary, they've been trying to preempt the formation of a coalition government. This is what they think, I'm not saying it's true, but I think clearly there's suspicion now in Iran that the Pakistanis might have cheated them, one. And two, also the suspicion is that within the Taliban, the current dynamics might make it very difficult in the future for Iran to recover the kind of influence that he thinks it deserves, because Iran spent a lot of money on the Taliban, human resources, the grace of Revolutionary Guards of Iran spread around many provinces of Afghanistan, so people died there helping the Taliban. Money was spent, logistics was delivered, and of course political capital was spent. And of course, the Iranians basically sacrificed their lives for the sake of the Taliban. They convinced Rabbani and others to make the deal that led to the fall of the Northeast first, then of the West, in the hands of the Taliban. So they basically gave away what they had. So this, and of course, there is the other issue, which is more, there are lobbies, of course, in Iran that are very sensitive about the fate of Afghanistan Shias, and they're not happy about the fact that the Taliban have been meeting, of course, the Shia leaders, those who are still in Kabul, they've been polite in the meetings. At the beginning, they're making a lot of promises, but already now in the recent meetings, the demand of the Adaras to have, for example, Jafari law courts are being ignored. The Taliban are dodging these requests. They're not answering. And I think after weeks and weeks of meetings, of course, these Adara leaders are beginning to think, this looks like we're not going to get anything here. What they got is in the second wave of appointment, they got a doctor, a Zara doctor being appointed, but that's very little, of course, for them. They were used to have their representatives in every government after 2001. So it's a major concern. Of course, the Taliban, I think, they behave the way they behave for a number of reasons. One is that the Iranians, as it happens to them, and the Russians, it is happening even more often to them, they've been quite arrogant in their demeanor, in their attitude to the Taliban. In general, toward Afghanistan, they tend to behave like that because especially the Iranians consider the Afghans, at best poor relatives, and at worst, almost an inferior race. So they've been a little bit, quite prevaricating. And the Russians also have been quite arrogant at diplomatic level, in the messaging they were sending to Kabul. And of course, the Taliban are not the kind of types who, go over this very easily. So in part, the Taliban wanted to teach a lesson to the Iranians. Now, in the second wave of appointments, Sadr got the job of Deputy Minister of Interior. People around him say that he accepts that, and probably less what he wanted. He was hoping for a ministerial position. Zakir also accepted, but Zakir is not so close to the Iranian, but anyway, he also accepted his appointment as Deputy Minister of Defense. So I think there is some kind of movement now from the Taliban side to kind of bend fences, but still the Iranians have got very little. This might change. At the same time, in the days when these things are happening, when the Iranians were left high and dry in the wave of appointments, it emerged, it happened actually early, but it emerged that the Saudis were negotiating, they're talking to the Taliban, so they're reconnected, after a very cold attitude toward the Taliban takeover Kabul. Within days, or basically by the end of August, the Saudis had an envoy, they are talking to the Taliban. Of course, nobody knows what they told to each other, but the very fact that, even the messaging coming from the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia was much warmer to the Taliban. And they were the only one, the Saudis had been the only one of all the regional countries in their open messaging who didn't mention the need for an inclusive Afghan government, because of course the Saudis themselves are not very much into inclusiveness, I would say, no for the matter of women's rights or human rights or political rights. And of course, inclusiveness in Afghanistan now means mostly Hazaras, Shias. Yeah, so it's not going to be the Saudis who are going to advocate for that. So I think that the Iranians, of course, noticed that also the Emirates became a little bit more involved, after this early, cold attitude. So they probably noticed this, and at the same time, when they were hearing that they were going to be cut off from any influence over the new Taliban government, so probably they calculated 2 + 2 makes 4. So I think they became very suspicious. They might even overstate the case. I think probably, I suspect, knowing the Taliban, that a bit like the government of Afghanistan of the past, they might be manipulating the regional countries in order to milk them as much as possible. So, because some of the countries, like Qatar, for example, the Qataris they've been talking a lot, visiting a lot, but haven't been paying a lot. They've been slow in opening their wallets, I think the Taliban felt, of course, if the Saudis are out, if the Emirates are out, then the Qataris are not in a hurry to spend on us, So maybe we need to get them back into the picture. At worst, it will help convincing the Qataris to pay. At worst, if the Qataris don't pay, we can still tell them, at the end of the day, these Qataris and these Iranians, they're not that good. Sorry, we're a bit too close to them, but we're still here. You can still rebuild the relationship. So I think, the Taliban now, they don't have enough money to run their government. They have some money, but of course the priority is paying for the army, of course, first of all, and a few other things. I think they estimate they need $3 to $4 billion to run the whole show, which is less than the Islamic Republic, but still quite a bit of money. In terms of taxes, they can raise more than the previous government, also because they can raise money also from smuggling, which is a big advantage compared to the previous government. But I don't think they can raise 3 to 4 billions. Of course, you have to consider that, the Taliban are less dishonest than the previous government, but they're not pure either, So you always have to consider there will be some leakage, that not all the money that could be raised will be raised. So I think, reaching $3 to $4 billion with the economy in the current state is impossible. So they need help, and urgently, because otherwise the state collapses. If you don't pay salaries, then for some weeks it can be okay, people can wait, but eventually there won't be anything left. The whole state will disappear. They know that, and that's why they become a bit nervous. In the Qataris, where I hope, the Chinese, where I hope, but none of them has really been that generous, in terms of cash payments. Yeah, they send some aid, that's fine, but they really need the money to keep the state running. And I think that's one reason why they've been being quite manipulative, or the Iranians and the others. I think you're silent, and I'm not silent.
Sorry about the sound. I was forgetting about the sound. Thank you so much. I learned immensely, especially on Iran. Brilliant lesson. I mean, I have no words. I'm going to spare myself because we have little time now, and I would like, in this final round, to still give the floor to our 2 other participants. So, Siegfried, regarding Pakistan, they apparently won the first battle for domination of the Taliban. The Iranians are crossed, because they don't have enough. All this conversation of the inclusiveness, as very correctly was pointed out by Professor Giustozzi, is a bit of knowing what is going to be the state of play between Iran, Pakistan, Qatar, and so on. How do you think that Pakistani civil society might be reacting to this situation, if it will be prolonged or not? Because on the one hand, Pakistan is willing to show, well, we are victorious. We broke the shackles of slavery from Afghanistan. We are really the great guys, but the TTP is there, is being harbored by the Haqqanis, and is doing a lot of problems within Pakistan. And so how can they really try to put all of this together without, looking like being absolutely on wrong-footed?
I mean, regarding, you mentioned the terms civil society. Civil society in Pakistan, I don't think has much a say when it comes to Afghanistan. The actors who are determining the public debate in Pakistan are either, of course, Pakistani officials, and even more so religious conservative, extreme religious conservative, and they are quite loudly. And this is, which now comes when I'm coming back to the civil society, and the society in general. There are 2 major concerns, which I a little bit touched in my presentation. First of all, the security aspect. And here there are more and more doubts how the relationship between Islamabad and Kabul, the political leadership, will develop. So in particular, when it comes to how strong I think at the moment there's quite some confusion in Pakistan, Islamabad, or at least amongst the security circles, about the relation, about the Haqqani factor, how strong this will be, how effective will be this in terms of creating a threat for Pakistan when it comes. We have in August an upspring in in the tribal areas in Northwest Syristan, Southwest Syristan, on terrorist attacks. And of course, there's a threat that they will swap over to other areas besides that the TTP mentioned. They have a change in their overall goal, that they're not anymore primarily aiming at overthrow the Pakistani government. They are much lesser at the moment in their goal, focusing just on the tribal areas, and they are either secessionism in the best case for them, or at least large-scale autonomy with, of course, a Sharia-based administration. This is what the TTP aims for, but of course this is for Pakistan a no-go for the security establishment, because there's the threat of a domino effect, that other areas, regions might follow this example, and this could somehow lead to a defragmentation of the whole state. But this is a security aspect that that Pakistan is afraid of a deterioration of the security situation. This might also lead to more, again, military operation in the border to Afghanistan. We have to see how this plays out. But the biggest threat is now that this works and there is how the civil society is really concerned about the masses, are that is function like an engine and catalyst of more Islamization in Pakistan, that more and more demands are coming to bring the whole state on the Sharia track, and this is a very dangerous development. I don't know if it answers your question, but I'm willing to give more points when it's requested.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think that you really got to the point. That will be really a very, very difficult task for the Pakistani authorities to put together all of these objectives. I would like perhaps now to in the final round, to give the floor to James. I think, James, you really made the most comprehensive of all of the intervention. It has been so rich, and you raised so many issues. It's not possible to go all over them. Some of them, I think, they are perhaps the most interesting. These military, political, standoff. I would go a bit further. In military terms, how the background decision was possible. It would give rise to a webinar. It's the most unbelievable thing I've ever remembered to have seen. But I would concentrate on a single thing, because it's impossible to go on any other. This issue of, we are getting out of Afghanistan because now we are confronting China. Okay. To start with, to leave a neighboring country from China, saying we leave the neighboring country of China because we want to confront China, is by itself something very, very strange. But I was a month in July. I was in Tashkent, and it was so obvious that this announcement from the United States, this vacuum from the United States, was creating the atmosphere that the Central Asian countries that were there present, in the conference that was supposed to be on connectivity, but was actually, as I understood, the issue was to press Ashraf Ghani to go away, very bluntly, and the Central Asian countries, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and of course Uzbekistan, they were obviously seeing China as the reference. This was something one could not miss. And it was obviously also an impact of all of this decision making. And then we have the issue of inclusiveness. It's very, very interesting that the inclusiveness are not being thinking on the allies, because making an alliance between Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom, it's not really a big issue. Destroying the ongoing alliance with France and India, this is really a big issue, and this is really a lack of inclusiveness that facilitates the role of China. I'm speaking too much. my invitation would be, how do you really see this issue of China or as a consequence of what we are seeing after Kabul?
Yes, it's a very interesting question. I think important elements of it are still emerging. One of the key questions is what China will do when faced with instability in the region, now that it's clearly going to play a larger role, and who's going to intervene to try to address terrorist threats, including those that affect China more than some others, like the Etin and the Uyghur issue that is clearly very high on China's priorities list. There's also the matter of how trade and political relationships can be made more stable, so to speak, with Afghanistan and the state it is, and prospects for it. I suspect that China will want to lean heavily on Pakistan, but Siegfried can tell you more about this, I think. But I'll touch on it because I think it's important. I think there are limits to what Pakistan is both willing and to some extent able to do about the terrorist threat, including against China. My understanding is that the Taliban regime is not particularly interested in getting rid of Etin, the East Turkestan terrorist movement that China is so concerned about. The relationships between Taliban and Al-Qaeda remain. Despite statements by some senior US officials, Al-Qaeda never left Afghanistan, and I doubt that they're going to have a lower presence. I think it's only going upwards. I do think that China will have considerable tolerance for that. I also think that China and some other states will try to manage terrorist threats towards the West, if you like. And there's already some precedent for this. And that will then make it very difficult for US and allies to address. As I noted about the ability to conduct airstrikes, it's very, very poor now. And then the intelligence is arguably even poorer, given the tragic mistake on the 29th of August, the US drone strike. Drone strikes have long been a topic of contention. I would argue that even though they're quite a precise technology, the intelligence is what really matters. And there are many examples of that being incorrect in a very complicated context like Afghanistan. So without physical presence, I think China's going to have a problem dealing with terrorist threats and other issues. I think Pakistan will strengthen its relationship with the regime. It will become more involved, but then I think there'll be more international pressure on it. So this dynamic between China and Pakistan will be particularly important. I think the US and allies will get drawn back in towards Afghanistan because the scale of the terrorist threat will grow. Migration problems that are quite destabilizing for Western politics, as we've seen, will increase as well as humanitarian crisis worsens. And then, as I mentioned, I don't think any level of humanitarian aid is going to solve that, because quite a lot of it will get diverted, like in the 90s, for various power brokers, Taliban figures, Taliban's own agenda. It won't reach the people, much of it won't reach the people who need it. So it's not a very attractive future in Afghanistan, and you'll see why many Afghans would like to leave and are leaving. How the international community then decides to approach this, I think, is very, very interesting now. And that relates to the question of China, with this UN Security Council seat, cooperation regarding Afghanistan with Russia to some extent, another permanent member. And then at the moment, US doesn't seem to be a very clear line coming from what you're going to do about the Taliban regime. As we've seen, this question of recognition of the Taliban appointee for the UN seat has been kicked into touch with the Credentials Committee, which, interestingly, China, Russia, and US are on. So that's going to be a very important decision. It's going to set the tone. But I think, as Siegfried said, this attempt to de-link human rights from humanitarian aid towards Afghanistan is going to be an important dimension to Pakistan's efforts, and those of Qatar too. But that's very tricky for the West to handle, because particularly for the EU, there's an increasing rhetoric around this matter. So what options do you have? You take the harder route, if you like, or tough love, and say, we're not going to recognize you, we're going to continue humanitarian aid, but there are limits to what we can do? Or do you really push a lot of aid in and build up the recognition, even if you don't do it formally? This is, I think, the major policy question now facing Western capitals in particular. Obviously, some other states are not so concerned about the linkage. They don't really link it anyway, in many cases. So, my personal view is, at the moment, is better to be cautious and cautious regarding humanitarian aid and cautious regarding recognition. I think if China wishes to be so active in the region, then I think it needs to bring in the aid, and Russia as well. They wanted US and NATO, the NATO-led alliance out. So how can those countries and the member states continue to pay for Afghanistan without contributions for others who are now more influential? So tough discussions behind the scenes, and I think quite critical ones that will set the tone for other regions, including, as you mentioned, Asia Pacific. So thank you.
We are about to wind up our webinar. I absolutely subscribe to your points of view. I did not speak about Qatar, but of course, Qatar, that was the headquarters of the Taliban. We should not forget it was the main force, open force behind the Taliban. They made it known, oh, well, we do not want to be seen as partisans, so we should not be the main financial support for the Taliban. So fundamentally, Qatar is trying to do what it has been doing for a very long time, which is to infiltrate the West and to put the West to pay for its own policies and to its own projection. And the issue, as James has correctly put, is the West be really going to do that? Is there any sense in recognizing the Taliban? I subscribe to your point of view, James, absolutely. And of course, China, that it's not only to get you to the photograph with the 9 Talibans. Now the time is to pay. Of course, you are absolutely right. And unfortunately, I also agree with your predictions for the future. I would like not to agree. I would like to say, well, the Taliban will now suddenly discover that women are very important. They will give human equal rights to women and so forth. But I don't think it's very realistic. So I do think that this contribution of yours was absolutely fascinating. I have not seen nothing like that on this issue. You are absolutely brilliant researchers. We are at SADF completely, overwhelmed with pride for having you with us, and I hope we will have new opportunities, because your knowledge needs to be shared among those who care for the future of humanity, and in this case, the future of Afghanistan and our common values. Thank you so much for your participation, and I'm really looking forward to a next opportunity. We will see that we will have this in our website as soon as possible. Thank you so much for all of those that have been following our webinar. Thank you for Albino, that behind the scenes has been managing the whole of our exercise. Bye-bye.